꾸준한 영어 원서 읽기 500번 도전하고 있는 한 권을 500번 읽기 도전하고 있는 테드쌤입니다. 자, 오늘은 낭독을 시작하기 전에 정리하는 뇌라고 하는 책을 추천을 받았어요. 그래서 경로는 유튜브를 통해서 물론 영상을 보다가 저도 자극을 받아서 그 책을 지금 현재 대여 신청을 해놓은 상태입니다. 자, 나중에 기회가 된다면 원서로도 읽어보고 싶습니다. 그래서 그 원서를 제가 구하게 되면 그 원서로 낭독을 한번 해볼 생각입니다. 그 내용 중에 그 책을 지금 이제 제가 읽기 위해서 여러 가지 내용을 이제 파악하고 있는 중인데, 그 내용 중에 지금 딱 저한테 확 다가온 내용이 하나 있습니다. 그게 뭐냐면 도전적인 과제를 수행하기 위해서는 집중력이 필요한데, 집중력을 깨트리려고 우리를 유혹하는 것들이 현재는 너무 많다는 겁니다. 이게 뭐냐면 페이스북이라든지 트위터라든지 이메일, 문자, 오락, 이제 게임 같은 것들인데요. 얘들이 나쁘다라는 게 아니라 얘들이 이제 뇌 쾌락 중추를 자극을 해서 화학 물질이 이제 방출이 되는데 중독성이 아주 강하다고 합니다. 그래서 여기서 느끼는 쾌감들이 나를 이렇게 그 도구들에게서 손을 못 대게 하는 이유가 되는 거죠. 그렇게 되면은 제가 무언가를 해야 되는데 그 신경을 분산이 되어버리게 되어가지고 어떤 일을 집중을 못한다는 거예요. 그래서 진짜로 성공하는 분들은 자기가 뭔가를 해야 될 때는 그러한 기타 도구들에 대해서 일체의 접촉을 끊어버린다고 합니다. 옆쪽으로 넣어버리고 자기가 해야 될 것만 집중을 하는 거거든요. 실제로 이제 그 내용 중에 이제 저도 물론 발췌된 내용을 본 거지만, 삶의 가장 큰 만족은 오랫동안 정신을 집중하고 에너지를 쏟아야 하는 프로젝트를 마무리했을 때 찾아온다고 합니다. 이게 이제 우리나라에서도 굉장히 유명한 수학자께서 이런 말씀을 하셨어요. 아이들에게 정말 수학을 잘하게 하고 싶으냐? 그러면 많은 문제를 풀게 하지 말고 두세 문제만 주어라 라고 얘기를 하셨어요. 그래서 두세 문제를 끝까지 풀 수 있도록 놔두었을 때 그 아이들이 일주일, 심지어는 한 달이 될 수도 있는데 그 기간을 그 두 문제, 세 문제에만 집중해서 풀고 났을 때 그 답을 알았을 때의 쾌감은 여타 바로바로 이제 중독성을 주는 그 쾌락감은 차원이 다르다고 합니다. 만족감과 자존감 자체가 엄청나게 올라가기 때문에 이런 기회를 경험해본 친구들과 그러지 않은 친구들과는 큰 차이가 생기는 거죠. 그래서 저도 저 아이를 키우는 아빠이기도 하기 때문에 꼭 그렇게 해보려고 많이 애를 쓰고 있었거든요. 몰입이라는 책에서도 그런 얘기들이 있었어요. 그래서 그렇게 시도를 하고 있는데 생각보다 쉽지는 않은 것 같습니다. 하지만 우리가 쉽지 않다고 해서 놔버리면 안 되는 거죠. 꾸준히 도전해야 되는 거거든요. 그래서 저도 끝까지 이제 아이들에게 그러한 기회를 주려고 많이 하고 있습니다. 우리 둘째 녀석 같은 경우는 학교 시험 점수를 제가 아예 안 물어보죠. 근데 이제 도전을 해보라는 차원에서 많은 것들을 제시를 하고는 있는데 아이 키우는 게 쉬운 일은 아닙니다. 그렇지만 나름대로 열심히 하고 있다고 생각을 합니다. 좋은 기회를 주고 있다고 생각하고요. 그리고 제 자신도 스스로 우리 학원 학생들에게도 마찬가지지만 저도 저희 아이와 제 자신에게 저를 증명하기 위해서 지금 이러한 도전을 하고 있습니다. 이 도전이 결코 헛되지 않다라는 것, 저도 크고 대단한 프로젝트를 하는 건 아니지만 끈질기게 해서 그 끈질김이 주는 보상을 꼭 느껴보고 싶거든요. 그것들이 저를 더 업그레이드 시켜줄 거라고 믿는 바입니다. 자, 정리하는 내 여러분들도 구해보실 수 있다면 한번 구해서 읽어보십시오. 읽기는 쉽지는 않은 책이지만 굉장히 도움이 된다고 하니까 굉장히 지금 호기심이 생기고 그렇습니다. 같이 한번 좋은 책은 공유할 수 있었으면 좋겠습니다. 자, 이제 낭독 한번 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. Bunnicula Chapter 1 The Arrival. I shall never forget the... 죄송합니다. 자, 입이 아직 덜 풀렸어요. 다시 한번 읽어볼게요. Chapter 1 The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired old eyes on our visitor. I had been left home by the family with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think it's their way of making up for not taking me with them, as if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen. And the people think you are being impolite if you fall asleep and start to snore or scratch yourself in public. No, thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about that first night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows, the wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chester was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he'd staked out as his own. I saw that once again he'd covered the whole seat with his cat hair, and I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there is nothing that frightens Chester more than vacuum cleaner. In the midst of this reverie, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and see who it was. I knew it had to be my family, the Monroes. Since it was just about time for the movie to be over, after a moment, the front door flew open. There they stood in the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and in its glare, I noticed that Mr. Monroe was carrying a little bundle, a bundle with tiny glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad." "Take your boots off, you're soaking wet," replied his mother, somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. "But, Mom, what about... First, stop dripping on the carpet." "Would somebody like to take this?" asked Mr. Monroe, indicating the bundle with the eyes. "I'd like to remove my coat." "I will," Pete yelled. "No, I will," said Toby. "I found him. You will drop him. I will not. You will too." "Mom, Pete punched me." "I will take him," said Mrs. Monroe. "Take off your coat this minute." But she became so involved in helping the boys out of their coats that she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one had been said hello to me. I wimpled to remind them that I was there. "Harold," cried Toby, "guess what happened to me?" And then, all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel I must explain something in our family. Everyone treats everyone else with great respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just a good boy, Harold, or use the little box, Chester, at our house. Oh no. With us, it's, "Hey, Harold, Dad got a raise and now we're in a higher tax bracket," or "Come sit on the bed, Chester, and watch this Wild Kingdom show. Maybe you will see a relative," which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Monroe is a college professor and Mrs. Monroe is a lawyer, so we think of it as a rather special household, and we are therefore rather special pets. So it wasn't at all surprising to me that they took the time to explain the strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of the little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the feet of the audience already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly, so they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who's the little one, sprang up from his chair and squealed that he had settled something. Mr. Monroe told him to stop making a fuss and move to another seat. But in an unusual display of the independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what it was he had set up. An usher came over to their row to shush them, and Mr. Monroe borrowed his flashlight. What they found on Toby's chair was the little blanket bundle that was now sitting on Mr. Monroe's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit, sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, but the Monroes were unable to decipher them because they were in a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer for a better look. Now, most people might call me a mongrel, but I have some pretty fancy bloodlines running through these veins, and the Russian wolfhound happens to be one of them. Because my family got around a lot, I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian Mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell if it was a note from a relieved mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. The little guy was shivering from fear and cold. It was decided that Mr. Monroe and the boys would make a house for him out of an old crate and some heavy-duty wire mesh from the garage. For the night, the boys would make a bed for him in the shoebox. Toby and Pete ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Monroe went to the kitchen to get him some milk and lettuce. Mr. Monroe sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he were wondering how he came to be sitting in his own living room in a wet raincoat with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chester, and the two of us casually moved over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think rabbits like milk," he answered. Chester and I were unable to continue our conversation because a deafening crash commanded on our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Ma, Toby broke the rabbit's house!" "I didn't. I just dropped it. Pete won't let me carry it. It's too big. Toby's too little." "I'm not. You're two." "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Monroe called out as she entered with the milk and lettuce. "Let's try to get it in here with as little hysteria as possible, please." Chester turned to me and said under his breath, "That lettuce looks repulsive. But if there's any milk left, I get it." I certainly wasn't going to argue with him. I'm a waterman myself. At that moment, the crate arrived, barely standing the strain of being pulled in two directions at once. "Ma, Toby says he's gonna keep the rabbit in his room. That's not fair. Harold sleeps in his room." "Only sometimes," I thought. "But I know he's got a leftover ham sandwich in his drawer." Toby's a nice kid, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't hurt that he shared his stash with me. It was, after all, at one of those late-night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake, and Toby, noting my preference, has kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Pete, on the other hand, doesn't believe in sharing, and the only time I tried to sleep on his bed, he rolled over on me and pinned me by my ears so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. I had a crick in my neck for days. "But he's mine," Toby said. "I found him." "You sat on him, you mean." "I found him, and he's sleeping in my room." "You can keep Smelly Old Harold in your room, and Chester too, if you want to, but I'm gonna keep the rabbit in mine." Smelly Old Harold? I would have bitten his ankle. But I knew he hadn't changed his size for a week. Smelly indeed. Mr. Monroe spoke up. "I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room on that table by the window. It's light there, and he will get lots of fresh air." "Peter's taller than I am," Toby cried. "He will be able to see the rabbit better." "Too bad, Squirt." "Okay," said Mrs. Monroe through clenched teeth. "Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and then we can all get some sleep." "Why?" Pete asked. "I don't want to go to sleep." Mrs. Monroe smiled a little too sweetly at Pete. "Look, Ma," said Toby. "He's not drinking his milk." Chester nudged me in the ribs. "Didn't I tell you?" he asked. "Excuse me while I make myself available." "Hey," said Toby, "we gotta name him." Can't that wait until tomorrow? Asked Mr. Monroe. The boys shouted in unison. No! He has to have a name right now. I have to say I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really gonna call me Fluffy, as Mrs. Monroe had suggested. Well, all right, sighed Mrs. Monroe. What about, say, Bun Bun? Uh-oh, there she goes again, I thought. Where does she get them? Yuck, we all said. Well, then, how about Fluffy? She offered hopefully. Peter looked at his mother and smiled. You never give up, do you, Ma? Meanwhile, Chester, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Monroe's ankles and purring loudly. No, Chester, not now, she said, pushing him aside. He wants to help us name him, don't you, Chester? Toby asked, as he scooped him up into his arms. Chester shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he had in mind. Come on, Harold, Toby called. You've got to help with the name, too. I joined the family and the serious thinking began. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. So this is a rabbit, I thought. He sort of looks like a Chester, only he's got longer ears and a shorter tail, and a motor in his nose. Well, said Pete after a moment, since we found him at the movies, why don't we call him Mr. Johnson? There was a moment of silence. Who's Mr. Johnson? Asked Toby. The guy who owns the movie theater. Pete answered. No one seemed to like the idea. How about the prince? Said Mr. Monroe. Dad, said Toby, are you kidding? Well, I had a dog named the Prince once. He replied lamely. Prince, I thought, that's a silly name for a dog. We found him at a Dracula movie. Let's call him Dracula, Toby said. That's a stupid name, said Pete. No, it's not. And anyway, I found him, so I should get to name him. Mom, you're not gonna let him name him, right, are you? That's favoritism, and I'll be traumatized if you do. Mrs. Monroe looked in wonder at Pete. Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please, please, please. And with each please, he squeezed the Chester a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the bowl of milk and moved toward the kitchen. Chester followed her every movement with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, Let's not have any more argument. We'll compromise. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie, so we will call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula. That should make everybody happy, including me. What about me? Murmured the Chester. I won't be happy until she puts down that milk. Well, guys, is that okay with you? She asked. Toby and Pete looked at one another, and then at the rabbit. A smile grew on Toby's face. Yeah, Ma, I think that name is just right. Pete shrugged. It's okay, but I get to feed him. Okay, I'm gonna put the milk back in the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow. What about Chester? Toby said, dropping the frantic cat to the floor. Maybe he would like it. Chester made a beeline for Mrs. Monroe and looked up at her plaintively. Oh, Chester doesn't want any more milk, do you, Chester? You've already had your milk today. She reached down, patted Chester on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Chester didn't move. Okay, bedtime, said Mr. Monroe. Good night, Bunnicula, Toby said. Good night, Count Bunnicula, Pete said sarcastically, in what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw a flicker of movement from the cage. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. I licked Toby. Good night. Good night, smelly Harold. Good night, dumb Chester. I drooled on Peter's foot. Mom, Harold drooled on my foot. Good night, Pete, Mrs. Monroe said with great finality as she came back into the living room. And then, more calmly, good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe went up the stairs together. You know, dear, Mr. Monroe said, that was very clever, Bunnicula, but I could never have thought of a name like that. Oh, I don't know, Robert. She smiled as she put her arm through his. I think Prince is a lovely name, too. The room was quiet. Chester was still sitting by the window, closed the kitchen door, in a state of shock, Slowly, he turned to me. I wish they hadn't named him Fluffy, was all he said. 오, 다른 때보다 훨씬 잘 읽지 않았나요? 감정도 많이 제대로 살렸고, 저는 나름대로는 꽤 만족합니다. 다만 이제 전체 내용들이 머릿속에서 차트가 흐르듯이 쫙 흘러가면서 이게 돼야 되는데 부분 차트 형식으로 올라와서 그게 좀 불만족스럽기는 합니다. 그럼에도 불구하고 제 생각에 꽤나 잘 읽은 것 같습니다. 저를 칭찬합니다. 너무 잘 읽은 것 같습니다. 자, 두 번째 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. 이번 속도를 좀 더 빨리 올려야 되겠죠? Chapter 1, Dear Rival, I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired old eyes on our visitor. I had been left alone by the family with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold, you are the watchdog. I think it's their way of making up for not taking me with them. As if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen, and the people think you are being impolite. If you fall asleep and start to snore, or scratch yourself in public, no thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice, whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about the first night. Well, it was cold, the rain was pelting the windows, the wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chapter was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he'd taken out as his arm. I saw that once again he'd covered the whole seat with his cat hair, and I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there is nothing that frightens Chester more than the vacuum cleaner. In the midst of this reverie, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and to see who it was. I knew it had to be my family, the Monroes, since it was just about time for the movie to be over. After a moment, the front door flew open. There they stood in the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and in each glare, I noticed that Mr. Monroe was carrying a bundle with tiny glistening eyes. Pete and Toby pounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad." "Take your boots off, you are soaking wet," replied his mother. Somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. "But Mom, what about first stop dripping on the carpet?" "Would somebody like to take this?" asked Mr. Monroe, indicating the bundle with the eyes. "I'd like to remove my coat." "I will," Pete yelled. "No, I will," said Toby. "I found him." "You will drop him." "I will not. You will too." "Mom, Pete punched me." "I will take him," said Mrs. Monroe. "Take off your coat this minute." But she became so involved in helping the boys out of their coat that she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one had even said hello to me. I wimpled to remind them that I was there. "Harold," cried Toby, "guess what happened to me?" And then all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with great respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just a good boy, Harold, or you the little boss, Chester, or at our house. Oh no. With us, it's, "Hey, Harold, the dad got raised, and now we are in a higher tax bracket," or "Come sit on the bed, Chester, and watch this Wild Kingdom show. Maybe you will see a relative," which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Monroe is a college professor and Mrs. Monroe is a lawyer, so we think of it as a rather special household, and we are therefore rather special pets. So it wasn't at all surprising to me that they took the time to explain the strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of the little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the feet of the audience already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly, so they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who is the little one, sprang up from his chair and squealed that he had sat on something. Mr. Monroe told him to stop making a fuss and move to another seat, but in an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what it was he had sat on. An usher came over to their row to shush them, and Mr. Monroe borrowed his flashlight, and what he found on his chair was the little blanket bundle that was now sitting on Mr. Monroe's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit, sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, but the mourners were unable to decipher them because they were in a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer for a better look. Now, most people might call me a mongrel, but I have some pretty fancy bloodlines running through these veins, and the Russian wolfhound happens to be one of them. Because my family gets around a lot, I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian Mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby," but I couldn't tell if it was a note from a beloved mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. The little guy was shivering from fear and cold. It was decided that Mr. Murno and the boys would make a house for him out of an old crate and some heavy-duty wire mesh from the garage. For the night, the boys would make a bed for him in the shoebox. Toby and Pete ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Murno went to the kitchen to get him some milk and lettuce. Mr. Murno sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he were wondering how he came to be sitting in his own living room in a wet raincoat with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chester, and the two of us casually moved over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think rabbits like milk," he answered. Chester and I were unable to continue our conversation because a deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Ma, Toby broke the rabbit's house." I didn't, I just dropped it. "Pete won't let me carry it. It's too big, Toby's too little." "I'm not, you're too." "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Murno called out as she entered with the milk and lettuce. "Let's try to get it in here with as little hysteria as possible, please." Chester turned to me and said under his breath, "That lettuce looks repulsive, but if there's any milk left, I get it." I suddenly wasn't going to argue with him. I'm a woman myself. At that moment, the crate arrived, barely standing the strain of being pulled in two directions at once. "Ma, Toby says he's going to keep the rabbit in his room." "That's not fair. Harold sleeps in his room." "Only sometimes," I thought, "when I know he's got a leftover ham sandwiches in his drawer." Toby's a nice kid, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't hurt that he shared his stash with me. It was, after all, at one of the late-night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake. And Toby, noting my preference, has kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Pete, on the other hand, doesn't believe in sharing, and the only time I tried to sleep on his bed, he rolled over on me and pinned me by my ears so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. I had a crick in my neck for days. "But he's mine," Toby said. "I found him." "You sat on him, you mean?" "I found him, and he's sleeping in my room." "You can keep Smelly Old Harold in your room, and Chester too, if you want to, but I'm going to keep the rabbit in mine." Smelly Old Harold, I would have bitten his ankle, but I knew he hadn't changed his socks for a week. Smelly indeed. Mr. Murno spoke up. "I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room on that table by the window. It's light there, and he will get lots of fresh air." "He's taller than I am," Toby cried. "He will be able to see the rabbit better." "To bed, Squirt." "Okay," said Mrs. Murno through the clenched teeth. "Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and then we can all get some sleep." "Why?" Pete asked. "I don't want to go to sleep." Mrs. Murno smiled a little too sweetly at Pete. "Look, Ma," said Toby, "he's not drinking his milk." Chester nutted me in the ribs. "Didn't I tell you?" he asked. "Excuse me, while I make myself available." "Hey," said Toby, "we gotta name him." "Can't that wait until tomorrow?" asked Mr. Murno. The boys shouted in unison. "No, he has to have a name right now." I have to say, I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really going to call me Fluffy, as Mrs. Murno had suggested. "Well, all right," sighed Mrs. Murno. "What about, say, Bun Bun? Uh-oh, there she goes again. I thought, where does she get them?" "Yuck," we all said. "Well then, how about Fluffy?" she offered hopefully. Pete looked at his mother and smiled. "You never give up, do you, Ma?" Meanwhile, Chester, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Murno's ankles and purring loudly. "No, Chester, not now," she said, pushing him aside. "He wants to help us name him. Don't you, Chester?" Toby asked as he scooped him up into his arms. Chester shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he had in mind. "Come on, Harold," Toby called. "You've got to help me with the name, too." I joined the family and the serious thinking began. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. So this is a rabbit, I thought. He sort of looks like a Chester, only he's got longer ears and a short tail, and a motor in his nose. Well, said Pete. After a moment, since we found him at the movies, why don't we call him Mr. Johnson? There was a moment of silence. Who's Mr. Johnson? Asked Toby. The guy who owns the movie theater. Pete answered. No one seemed to like the idea. How about the prince? Said Mr. Monroe. Dad, said Toby. Are you kidding? Well, I had a dog named the Prince once. He replied lamely. Prince, I thought. That's a silly name for a dog. We found him at a Dracula movie. Let's call him Dracula, Toby said. That's a stupid name, said Pete. No, it's not, and anyway, I found him, so I should get to name him. Mom, you're not gonna let him name him, are you? That's your favoritism, and I'll be traumatized if you do. Mrs. Monroe looked in wonder at Pete. Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please, 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 and with each please, he squeezed Chester a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the bowl of milk and moved toward the kitchen. Chester followed her every movement with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, Let's not have any more arguments. We will compromise. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie, so we will call him Bunnicula. That should make everybody happy, including me. What about me? Muttered Chester. I won't be happy until she puts down the milk. Well, guys, is that okay with you? She asked. Toby and Pete looked at one another, and then at the rabbit. A smile grew on Toby's face. Yeah, Ma, I think that name is just right. Pete shrugged. It's okay, but I get to feed him. Okay, I'm gonna put the milk bag in the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow. What about Chester? Toby said, dropping the French cat to the floor. Maybe he would like it. Chester made a beeline for Mrs. Monroe and looked up at her plaintively. Oh, Chester didn't want any more milk, do you, Chester? You've already had your milk today. She reached down, patted Chester on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Chester didn't move. Okay, bad time, said Mr. Monroe. Good night, Bunnicula, Toby said. Good night, Count Bunnicula, Peter said sarcastically, in what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw a flicker of movement in his cage from the cage. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. I licked Toby good night. Good night, smelly Harold. Good night, dumb Chester. I drew on Peter's foot. Mom, Harold drew on my foot. Good night, Pete, Mrs. Monroe said with great finality as she came back into the living room, and then more calmly, Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe went up the stairs together. You know, dear, Mr. Monroe said, that was very clever, Bunnicula. I could never have thought of a name like that. Oh, I don't know, Robert. She smiled as she put her arm through his. I think Prince is a lovely name, too. The room was quiet. Chester was still sitting by the closed kitchen door in a state of shock. Slowly, he turned to me. I wish they had named him Fluffy, was all he said. Yeah. 많이 늘지 않았습니까? 굉장히 많이 는 것 같아요. 제가 진짜 발음이 안 좋았거든요. 진짜 발음이 안 좋은데 저도 제가 이렇게 읽고 있는 게 신기할 따름입니다. 물론 이제 발음을 고치겠다고 발음 공부도 굉장히 열심히 하고 했는데 아는 것과 실제 하는 것과는 굉장히 차이가 있습니다. 그걸 이렇게 시간이 오래 지난 후에 알게 된다는 것도 참 한편으로는 부끄럽지만 한편으로는 그래도 지금이라도 깨달았으니까 어디냐 하는 생각이 듭니다. 열심히 한다는 거의 재미가 이런 건지 참 몰랐습니다. 인생을 열심히 살자는 건 아닙니다. 저 나름대로 열심히 살았습니다. 인터넷에 구글에 검색해보면 제가 나온단 말이죠. 네. 그래서 제가 엄청 열심히 살았어요. 근데 즉흥적인 게 되게 많았죠. 이렇게 열심히 꾸준히 한결 오래 해본 적이 없어요. 자, 꾸준히 한다는 거에 대한 즐거움, 그것들이 주는 어떤 중독감, 지겹고 하기 싫은 걸 이겨내는 힘, 그걸 뭐라고 표현해야 될지 모르겠는데 지금은 그게 조금씩 생기는 것 같습니다. 늦었지만 제가 아이들도 이제 큰 녀석 같은 경우는 이제 곧 대학도 가야 되고 이런 나이지만 재밌네요. 재밌습니다. 뭐라 말하기는 힘들지만 중간중간 분명히 과정 속에서 힘든 거는 있지만 재미있습니다. 그 말밖에 할 게 없습니다. 한 번 더 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. 조금 더 빨리 머릿속에 차트를 그려보면서 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. Chapter 1. The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired old eyes on our visitor. I had been left at home by the family with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold, you are the watchdog. I think it's their way of making up for not taking me with them. As if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen. And the people think you are being impolite if you fall asleep and start to snore or scratch yourself in public. No, thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about that first night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows. The wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chester was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he'd taken out as his own. I saw that once again he'd covered the full seat with his cat hair, and I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there is nothing that frightens Chester more than the vacuum cleaner. In the midst of this reverie, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get out and see who it was. I knew it had to be my family, the Monroes, since it was just about time for the move to be over. After a moment, the front door flew open. There they stood in the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and in its glare, I noticed that Mr. Monroe was carrying a little bundle with tiny, glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad." "Take your boots off, you are soaking wet," replied his mother, somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. "But Mom, what about..." "First, stop dripping on the carpet. Would somebody like to take this?" asked Mr. Monroe, indicating the bundle with the eyes. "I'd like to remove my coat." "I will," Pete yelled. "No, I will," said Toby. "I found him. You will drop him." "I will not. You will too." "Mom, Pete punched me." "I will take him," said Mrs. Monroe. "Take off your coats this minute." But she became so involved in helping the boys out of their coats that she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one had even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. "Harold," cried Toby, "guess what happened to me?" And then all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with great respect for his or her intelligence. They're good for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just a "good boy, Harold," or "use the little box Chester," or at our house. No, with us it's, "Hey, Harold, Dad got raised, and now we are in a higher tax bracket." Or, "Come sit on the bed, Chester, and watch this Wild Kingdom show. Maybe you will see a relative," which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Monroe is a college professor, and Mrs. Monroe is a lawyer. So we think of it as a rather special household, and we are therefore rather special pets. So it wasn't at all surprising to me that they took the time to explain the strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of the little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the feet of the audience already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly, so they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who was the little one, sprang up from his chair and squealed that he had sat on something. Mr. Monroe told him to stop making a fuss and move to another seat. But in an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what he had set on. An usher came up to their row to shush them, and Mr. Monroe borrowed his flashlight. What they found on Toby's chair was the little blanket bundle that was now sitting on Mr. Monroe's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit, sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, but the Monroes were unable to decipher them because they were in a totally unfamiliar language. I moved close for a better look. Now, most people might call me a mongrel, but I have some pretty fancy bloodlines running through these veins, and the Russian wolfhound happens to be one of them. Because my family got around a lot, I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian Mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." but I couldn't tell if it was a note from a bereaved mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. The little guy was shivering from fear and cold. It was decided that Mr. Monroe and the boys would make a house for him out of an old crate and some heavy-duty wire mesh from the garage. For the night, the boys would make a bed for him in the shoebox. Toby and Peter ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Monroe went to the kitchen to get him some milk and lettuce. Mr. Monroe sat down, a dazed expression in his eye, as if he were wondering how he came to be sitting in his own living room in a wet raincoat with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chapter, and the two of us casually moved over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think rabbits like milk," he answered. Chapter and I were unable to continue our conversation because a deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Ma, Toby broke the rabbit house. I didn't, I just dropped it. Pete won't let me carry it. It's too big, Toby's too little. I'm not your turn." "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Monroe called out as she entered with the milk and lettuce. "Let's try to get it in here with as little hysteria as possible, please." Chester turned to me and said under his breath, "That lettuce looks repulsive. But if there's any milk left, I get it. I certainly wasn't going to argue with him. I'm a waterman myself." At that moment, the crate arrived, barely standing the strain of being pulled in two directions at once. "Ma, Toby said he's going to keep the rabbit in his room. That's not fair. Harold sleeps in his room." Only sometimes, I thought. When I know he's got a leftover ham sandwich in his drawer. Toby's a nice kid, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't hurt that he shared his stash with me. It was at one of those late-night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake, and Toby, noting my preference, has kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Pete, on the other hand, doesn't believe in sharing, and the only time I tried to sleep on his bed, he rolled over on me and pinned me by my ears so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. I had a crick in my neck for days. "But he's mine," Toby said. "I found him." "You sat on him. You mean I found him, and he's sleeping in my room. You can keep Smelly Old Harold in your room, and Chapter too, if you want to, but I'm going to keep the rabbit in mine." Smelly Old Harold, I would have bitten his ankle, but I knew he hadn't changed his socks for a week. Smelly indeed. Mr. Monroe spoke up. "I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room on that table by the window. It's light there, and he will get lots of fresh air." "Peter's taller than I am," Toby cried. "He will be able to see the rabbit better." "Too bad, Squirt." "Okay," said Mrs. Monroe through clenched teeth. Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and then we can all get some sleep." "Why?" Peter asked. "I don't want to go to sleep." Mrs. Monroe smiled a little too sweetly at Pete. "Look, Ma," said Toby. "He's not drinking his milk." Chapter nudged me in the ribs. "Didn't I tell you?" he asked. "Excuse me while I'm making myself available." "Hey," said Toby, "we gotta name him." "Can't that wait until tomorrow?" asked Mr. Monroe. The boys shouted in unison. "No, he has to have a name right now." I have to say I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really going to call me Fluffy as Mrs. Monroe had suggested. "Well, all right," sighed Mrs. Monroe. "What about, say, Bum Bum?" Oh, there she goes again," I thought. "Where did she get them?" "Yeah," we all said. "Well then, how about Fluffy?" she offered hopefully. Peter looked at his mom and smiled. "You never give up, do you, Ma?" Meanwhile, Chapter, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Monroe's ankles and purring loudly. "No, Chester, not now," she said, pushing him aside. "He wants to help us name him, don't you, Chester?" Toby asked. As he scooped him up into his arms, Chester shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he had in mind. "Come on, Harold," Toby called. "You've got to help with the name too." I joined the family and the serious thinking began. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. "So this is a rabbit." I thought he sort of looked like a Chester, only he's got longer ears and a shorter tail and a motor in his nose. "Well," said Pete, after a moment, "since we found him at the movies, why don't we call him Mr. Johnson?" There was a moment of silence. "Who's Mr. Johnson?" asked the guy who owns the movie theater. Pete answered. No one seemed to like the idea. "How about Prince?" said Mr. Monroe. "Dad," said Toby, "are you kidding?" "Well, I had a dog named Prince once," he replied lamely. "Prince," I thought, "that's a silly name for a dog." "We found him at a Dracula movie." "Let's call him Dracula," Toby said. "That's a stupid name," said Pete. "No, it's not, and anyway, I found him, so I should get to name him." "Mom, you're not gonna let him name him, are you? That's a favoritism, and I'll be traumatized if you do." Mrs. Monroe looked in wonder at Pete.
Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please, 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 and with each please, he squeezed the Chatter a little harder. Mrs. Murnau picked up the bowl of milk and moved it toward the kitchen. Chatter followed her every movement with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, "Let's not have any more argument. We will compromise. He's a bunny and we found him at a Dracula movie, so we will call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula. That should make everybody happy, including me." "What about me?" muttered the Chatter. "I won't be happy until she puts down the milk." "Well, guys, is that okay with you?" she asked. Toby and Pete looked at one another, and then at the rabbit. A smile grew on Toby's face. "Yeah, Mom, I think their name is just right." Pete shrugged. "It's okay, but I get to feed him." "Okay, I'm gonna put the milk back in the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow." "What about Chatter?" Toby said, dropping the friendly cat to the floor. "Maybe he would like it." Chatter made a beeline for Mrs. Murnau and looked up at her plaintively. "Oh, Chatter doesn't want any more milk, do you, Chatter? You've already had your milk today." She reached down, patted Chatter on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Chatter didn't move. "Okay, bedtime," said Mr. Murnau. "Good night, Bunnicula," Toby said. "Good night, Count Bunnicula," Pete said sarcastically, in what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. "I may be wrong, but I thought I saw a flicker of movement from the cage." "Good night, Harold. Good night, Chatter." I licked Toby good night. "Good night, Smelly Harold." "Good night, Dumb Chatter." I drooled on Peter's foot. "Mom, Harold drooled on my foot." "Good night, Pete," Mrs. Murnau said with great finality as she came back into the living room, and then more calmly, "Good night, Harold. Good night, Chatter." Mr. and Mrs. Murnau went up the stairs together. "You know, dear," Mr. Murnau said, "that was very clever, Bunnicula. I could never have thought of a name like that." "Oh, I don't know, Robert." She smiled as she put her arm through his. "I think Prince is a lovely name, too." The room was quiet. Chatter was still sitting by the closed kitchen door in a state of shock. Slowly, he turned to me. "I wish they had named him Fluffy," was all he said. 와우! 오늘도 3번 읽었습니다. 자, 오늘은 여기까지 하겠습니다.